Department has opened a civil rights probe into the fatal shooting of Alex Pretti in Minneapolis.
FBI is now leading the investigation as new video shows Pretti clashing with federal agents 11 days before his death.
January 31st, 2026. This morning at 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time, the United States Department of Justice dropped a bombshell that's sending shockwaves through federal law enforcement.
DHS and, by extension, ICE has lost an incredible amount of credibility with respect to their ability to tell the truth. And so transparency in every phase of this investigation in terms of whose hands are touching it and who's supervising it is going to be the first key in terms of bridging that gap of trust that has now been broken with community. But I do want to go back to a critical point.
Attorney General Merrick Garland just announced a full criminal civil rights investigation into the killing of Alex Pretti, the 34-year-old ICU nurse who was shot 10 times by federal agents in Minneapolis. Federal agents are now facing potential prison time. This isn't an internal review. This isn't a slap on the wrist. This is a federal criminal probe, and it changes everything. Here's what just happened.
Hey there from downtown Minneapolis. Look at this crowd. Look at this. We are talking thousands upon thousands of people who are packing the streets, marching through downtown Minneapolis. This is an ICE out demonstration, exactly the kind of demonstration people here in the Twin Cities have been calling for nationwide. They're calling for school walkouts today, an economic blackout today and tomorrow, coast to coast, and they're showing up here in Minneapolis, clearly hoping.
The Department of Homeland Security says the FBI will lead the probe. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche didn't say why the agency was opening an investigation, but it has previously said a similar investigation was not necessary in the death of Renee Good, who was also shot by federal agents in Minneapolis.
At exactly 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, the Department of Justice issued a statement that no federal agent ever wants to see. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division is opening what they call a pattern and practice investigation into the Minneapolis Field Office of Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
It wants to de-escalate the situation. We're going to have a mass deportation, but we're going to prioritize the arrest of criminals and public safety threats. Meeting with the governor and AG and Mayor Frey, here's what we came out with.
Let's be clear about what that actually means. When the DOJ opens a pattern and practice investigation, they're not looking at one incident. They're looking at whether an entire office has been systematically violating people's constitutional rights. This is the same type of investigation they opened into police departments in Ferguson after Michael Brown, in Baltimore after Freddie Gray, and in Louisville after Breonna Taylor. And in every single one of those cases, people went to prison. The investigation will focus on two deaths that occurred within 48 hours of each other in Minneapolis. First, Alex Pretti, 34 years old, ICU nurse at Hennepin County Medical Center.
And developing tonight, the Justice Department confirmed it is conducting a civil rights investigation into Pretti's death in Minneapolis. But the Deputy Attorney General said the shooting death of Renee Good by an ICE agent earlier this month is not being conducted that way. Maggie Vespa takes a look now at the protest happening in Minneapolis today.
Shot 10 times by federal agents on January 22nd while he was walking home from his shift. He was unarmed. He was an American citizen. And according to multiple witnesses, he had his hands raised when agents opened fire. Second, Renee Good, 25 years old, community organizer and graduate student at the University of Minnesota. She died during a separate ICE operation on January 24th. The circumstances of her death are still unclear, but witnesses say she was trampled by federal agents during a crowd dispersal operation. 2 American citizens, 2 deaths, 48 hours, all at the hands of federal agents operating in Minneapolis.
At the spot he was killed after speaking to President Trump. I spoke to Walls just as he arrived.
And do you believe that there will be a shift in tone here from the administration after your conversation with the president here on the streets?
I'm not so interested in a shift of tone. We just need them out of here, and we need accountability for what's happened.
And tonight, growing bipartisan calls for Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem to resign. After millions of Americans saw those eyewitness videos showing that Alex Pretti never brandished or pulled out his gun before he was killed, this is what Secretary Noem said just hours after the fatal shooting.
This looks like a situation where an individual arrived at this scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement.
But the DOJ didn't stop with just announcing an investigation into these 2 deaths. They went further. The statement says they will examine whether federal agents engaged in a pattern of constitutional violations during Operation Metro Surge. That was the code name for the massive federal operation that deployed 2,000 ICE and DHS agents to Minneapolis, with orders to make 3,000 arrests in 72 hours. The DOJ wants answers to specific questions. Who authorized agents to operate without body cameras? Who approved the use of unmarked vehicles and civilian clothing? Who decided that agents could wear masks and refuse to identify themselves?
There's new video that has surfaced leading up to the fatal shooting of Alex Pretti. Chief Investigative Correspondent Aaron Katersky is here with the details. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Michael. This new video shows protesters and observers on the scene 6 minutes before the fatal shooting of Alex Pretti. Those protesters and observers sounded whistles as federal officers assembled by a donut shop to begin an immigration enforcement action. Shortly after he was shot and killed, Homeland Security investigations said the FBI arrived to collect evidence, including Pretti's phone and the gun he had a legal permit to carry. Officials have not said what's on Pretti's phone or whether it could help determine whether the officers reasonably believe they were under threat.
And most importantly, who gave the authorization to use lethal force against unarmed American citizens? These aren't rhetorical questions. The DOJ is demanding answers, and federal agents who can't provide satisfactory answers are going to face criminal charges. The Department of Justice doesn't open criminal investigations lightly. They need evidence. They need probable cause. They need to believe that crimes were committed. And in this case, the evidence is overwhelming. Over the past 9 days since Alex Pretti was killed, video footage has been flooding social media. Cell phone videos from witnesses who were at the scene, security camera footage from nearby businesses, dashboard camera footage from vehicles that were in the area, body camera footage from Minneapolis police officers who responded after the shooting. All of this video tells the same story. Alex Pretti was not a threat. He was backing away from federal agents. His hands were raised. He was complying with their commands. And they shot him anyway. Not once. Not twice. 10 times. But the video evidence doesn't stop there. After Alex Pretti fell to the ground, bleeding from 10 gunshot wounds, federal agents stood over him for 11 minutes without rendering aid. 11 minutes. Security footage shows agents on their radios, talking to supervisors, waiting for instructions, while Alex Pretti bled out on a Minneapolis street. By the time Minneapolis paramedics were allowed to approach, it was too late. He had lost too much blood. He died at the scene. And here's the thing that makes this so damning from a legal perspective. Federal agents have a constitutional duty to render aid after using force. It's established law. If you shoot someone, even if that shooting is justified, you have to try to save their life afterward. Federal agents didn't do that. They let Alex Pretti die. And that's not just a policy violation, that's a federal crime. Then there's the evidence about Renee Good's death. Video from that incident is even more disturbing. Federal agents in full tactical gear charged into a crowd of peaceful protesters who were blocking the entrance to an ICE detention facility. They weren't just dispersing the crowd, they were attacking it. Agents were using batons, pepper spray, and what witnesses describe as unnecessary and excessive physical force. Renee Good was knocked to the ground in the initial charge. And then, as protesters scattered and ran, she was trampled, not by other protesters, by federal agents in heavy tactical boots. Video shows at least 3 agents stepping on her as they chased other protesters.
Look, I know there's been a lot of discussion among the media around that, but just think about what that means. All that means is that DHS, as the Secretary has said, is conducting an investigation, as they should and as they do every time there's a tragic event like this. And the FBI, in their role, which is a separate role from DHS, is also looking into it and conducting an investigation. And that's not.
She suffered massive internal injuries and died at the hospital 2 hours later. The Hennepin County medical examiner ruled her death a homicide. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the chest and abdomen. In other words, she was beaten to death by federal agents. Let's be very clear about what's happening here. A DOJ civil rights investigation is not a slap on the wrist. It's not a performance review. It's not an opportunity for agents to explain their side of the story and move on with their lives. This is a criminal investigation. The DOJ is investigating whether federal agents committed crimes. Specifically, they're looking at violations of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. That's the federal statute that makes it a crime for anyone acting under color of law to willfully deprive someone of their constitutional rights. The penalty for violating that statute? Up to 10 years in federal prison. And if the violation results in death, which it did in this case twice, the penalty can be life in prison or even the death penalty. Here's how a DOJ civil rights investigation works. First, they assemble a team of prosecutors and FBI agents who specialize in civil rights cases. These aren't regular prosecutors. These are attorneys from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division who do nothing but investigate police misconduct and federal agent abuse. They're good at their jobs. They know how to build cases. They know how to flip witnesses. They know how to get convictions. Second, they start gathering evidence. They'll subpoena every email, every text message, every radio transmission from the day of the operation. They'll interview every agent who was there. They'll interview supervisors, commanders, and decision-makers. They'll reconstruct the entire chain of command to figure out who knew what and when. They'll look at training records to see if agents were properly trained. They'll look at policy manuals to see if policies were followed. They'll look at previous complaints to see if there's a pattern of misconduct. Third, They start making deals. Lower-level agents who cooperate early get immunity or reduced charges. Agents who refuse to cooperate get targeted for prosecution. The DOJ will start at the bottom and work their way up. They'll flip street-level agents to testify against their supervisors. They'll flip supervisors to testify against commanders. They'll flip commanders to testify against the people who planned the operation. By the time they're done, they'll have a complete picture of who did what and who's responsible. Fourth, they bring charges, not against everyone, just against the agents they can prove committed crimes. The agents who pulled the trigger on Alex Pretti, the agents who trampled Renee Good, the supervisors who authorized the tactics, the commanders who planned the operation. Those are the people facing federal prison time. The DOJ announcement has already had immediate effects. Within 2 hours of the announcement, ICE issued an emergency memo to all field offices nationwide. The memo suspends all enforcement operations in Minnesota pending policy review. That's bureaucratic language for we're terrified and we're backing off. Agents in Minnesota have been ordered to stand down. No arrests, no raids, no operations. Nothing until the DOJ investigation is complete. But the memo went further. It also announced new nationwide policies that take effect immediately. All ICE agents must wear body cameras during enforcement operations. All agents must use marked vehicles unless there's a specific operational reason not to. All agents must identify themselves when making contact with the public. And all agents must render aid immediately after any use of force. These policy changes are massive. Body cameras alone represent a fundamental shift in how ICE operates. For years, ICE has resisted body cameras. They've argued that body cameras would compromise officer safety, that they would reveal confidential tactics, that they would be too expensive to implement. But after 2 Americans died at the hands of ICE agents in Minneapolis, the agency had no choice. They had to implement body cameras or face the possibility that Congress would defund the entire agency. The body camera requirement takes effect in 30 days. Every ICE agent in America will be wearing a camera. Every interaction will be recorded. Every use of force will be documented. And if an agent turns off their camera or fails to activate it, that agent will face disciplinary action up to and including termination. The political fallout has been just as dramatic. Within hours of the DOJ announcement, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz held a press conference. He praised the DOJ for opening the investigation. He called the deaths of Alex Pretti and Renee Good tragic and preventable. And he announced that Minnesota will be the first state in the nation to pass legislation requiring all federal agents operating in Minnesota to comply with state transparency laws. That legislation will require federal agents to file use of force reports with state authorities. It will require federal agents to submit to state investigations if they use force. And it will give state prosecutors the authority to bring state criminal charges against federal agents who violate Minnesota law. Legal experts say the legislation is likely unconstitutional. Federal agents can't be required to follow state law while performing federal duties. But Governor Walz doesn't care. He's daring the federal government to challenge it in court. He's betting that the optics of the federal government suing to prevent transparency will be politically disastrous. So where does this go from here? The DOJ investigation will take months, possibly years. These cases are complex. Building a criminal case against federal agents is difficult. The agents will have the best defense attorneys money can buy. They'll have the support of their unions. They'll have the backing of law enforcement organizations across the country. And they'll argue that they were just doing their jobs, that they faced a dangerous situation, that they made split-second decisions under pressure. But here's the thing. The video evidence is devastating. You can't argue self-defense when the video shows the person you shot had their hands raised. You can't argue it was a split-second decision when the video shows you standing over a dying person for 11 minutes without rendering aid. You can't argue you were following policy when your own agency says the policy requires body cameras and you weren't wearing one. The most likely outcome is that several agents will be indicted within 6 to 12 months. The agents who shot Alex Pretti will face federal charges for deprivation of rights under color of law. The agents who trampled Renee Good will face similar charges. Supervisors who authorized the tactics will be charged with conspiracy. Commanders who planned the operation will be charged with violating constitutional rights. Some of these agents will take plea deals. They'll agree to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. They'll testify against their supervisors and commanders. They'll provide evidence about how the operation was planned and who made the key decisions. Other agents will go to trial. They'll argue they were following orders. They'll argue they feared for their lives. They'll argue the deaths were tragic accidents, and they'll lose. Because juries don't like it when federal agents kill unarmed American citizens and then stand around watching them die. Beyond the criminal charges, there will be civil lawsuits. The families of Alex Pretti and Renee Good will sue the federal government for wrongful death. Those cases will settle for millions of dollars. The city of Minneapolis will sue the federal government for the costs of responding to the crisis created by Operation Metro Surge. That case will also settle for millions. And individual agents will face personal civil liability if the criminal cases establish that they acted outside the scope of their employment. Federal agents have qualified immunity from civil lawsuits, but that immunity disappears if they're convicted of crimes. If agents go to prison for violating civil rights, they can also be sued personally and lose everything they own. This is a moment of accountability. For years, federal agents have operated with impunity. They've conducted operations without oversight, without transparency, and without accountability. They've hidden behind qualified immunity and federal authority. They've claimed that local authorities have no jurisdiction over them. They've argued that they answer only to their superiors in Washington, not to the communities where they operate. But today, that changes. Today, the Department of Justice said federal agents are not above the law. Today, the DOJ said killing unarmed American citizens has consequences. Today, the DOJ said there will be accountability. Alex Pretti was 34 years old. He was an ICU nurse who spent his career saving lives. He worked through the pandemic. He worked double shifts when his hospital was short-staffed. He was walking home from work when federal agents killed him. Renee Good was 25 years old. She was a graduate student studying social work. She wanted to help vulnerable communities. She was exercising her constitutional right to protest when federal agents killed her. These were not criminals. These were not threats. These were American citizens who died because federal agents used excessive force and then failed to render aid. Their families deserve justice. The community of Minneapolis deserves accountability. And the American people deserve to know that federal agents who kill unarmed citizens will face consequences. The DOJ investigation is just the beginning. There will be criminal trials. There will be civil lawsuits. There will be congressional hearings. There will be policy reforms. And there will be a national conversation about federal law enforcement and whether agencies like ICE have too much power and too little oversight. That conversation is long overdue. If you believe federal agents who kill unarmed Americans should face justice, type justice in the comments. If you believe the DOJ investigation is politically motivated, type defend. Let's see where America